In the spring of 2026, a single headline tore across the internet. Half of America's data centers canceled. Half. The backbone of the entire artificial intelligence boom. The warehouses full of chips behind every chatbot, every image, every promise of $1 trillion future. Supposedly collapsing in real time. Investors flinched. Stocks wobbled. The bubble, everyone agreed, had finally found its pin. There was just one problem. It wasn't true. Not the way they said it. But here's what makes this worth your next 10 minutes. The headline was wrong. And the reality underneath it was stranger and far more revealing than the myth. Because 3 different things were happening at the same moment. And only one of them was a lie. This is the story of the data center revolt of 2026. By the end, you'll see 3 forces colliding. A statistic that was quietly fabricated by machines. A grassroots uprising that almost nobody in Silicon Valley saw coming. And a physical bottleneck so basic, so unglamorous, that it threatens to do what no protest ever could. Together, they are not killing the AI build-out. They're sorting it, separating the real from the speculative. And how that sorting ends will decide who wins the most expensive race in corporate history. Let's start with the lie. The claim was simple. Roughly half of all planned United States data centers for 2026 would be delayed or canceled. It traced back to a real report, a Bloomberg piece, published on the 1st of April, about how America's AI build-out leans on electrical parts made in China. That part was true. But within days, some coverage and online commentary turned it into something punchier. Half of data centers canceled, and that version went viral. Then, in mid-June, an independent research firm called Semi-Analysis did something the headlines hadn't. They checked. Their conclusion was blunt. Stop saying half of this year's capacity is canceled. The problem, they explained, wasn't the number of canceled projects. It was the denominator, the total you divide by. The popular figure claimed that of 12 gigawatts planned for the year, only about 5 were actually under construction. But Semi-Analysis found that just the 2 largest cloud companies, on their own, already had more than 5 gigawatts under construction. The original count had simply missed most of the industry. It looked only at the big, flashy lighthouse projects, and ignored the quiet pipeline underneath. And they traced the bad math to a specific source. Forecasts built with AI-assisted models, scraping press releases, treating every grand announcement as fact, with little verification of which projects were actually moving forward. They had a name for it: vibe-coded estimates, machine-written panic. When Semi-Analysis revised their own forecast for the year, the change was about 1%, not 51. So no, the boom was not collapsing. But before you exhale, the other 2 forces are real. And they don't care about denominators. Start with the people. Across the United States, in the first 3 months of the year alone, opponents blocked or delayed at least 75 data center projects. Their combined value, roughly $130 billion. To put that in perspective, that single quarter matched the total for all of the previous year. And the resistance isn't just growing, it's organizing. The number of active grassroots opposition groups more than doubled, from 396 at the end of last year to 833 by March, across 49 states. In some places, groups formed before a project was even filed, mobilized on nothing but a rumor, a county permit notice, a neighbor's text message. This isn't a fringe. An Ipsos survey reportedly found the share of Americans who didn't want a data center near them climbing to around 70%. And when you listen to why, the reasons aren't abstract. Electricity bills going up, enormous water pulled from local sources, a low, constant hum that doesn't stop at night. The politics are strange, because the opposition crosses every line you'd expect it to respect. Nearly 70 local governments had passed bans by May. Seattle, the home of Microsoft and Amazon, imposed a 1-year pause, freezing 5 proposed projects in the city where this industry was born. Maine came within a single governor's veto of banning large new data centers statewide. And in Washington, a federal version was introduced by lawmakers as far apart as Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When a movement unites a small Missouri town, a senator from Vermont, and a congresswoman from New York, all without a shared party, a shared strategy, or even a shared vocabulary. It is not a passing mood. It is a structural shift, and structural shifts don't get unshifted. But even the revolt isn't the hardest wall. The hardest wall is a piece of metal most people have never thought about. It's called a transformer. Not the robot, the gray box that steps electricity up and down so it can move across the grid and into a building. It's boring. It's essential. And right now, you almost can't get one. Before 2020, ordering a large transformer took about 24 to 30 months. Today, the wait can stretch to 5 years. 5. And it's not just transformers. The same crunch hits switchgear, batteries, the gas turbines power plants need, where lead times in some cases have stretched towards 7 years. Think about what that means practically. A company can sign the lease, pour the concrete, rack the servers, and then wait, not weeks, not months, years, for the electrical infrastructure that makes the building anything other than a very expensive warehouse. And here's the uncomfortable detail underneath all of it. Much of this equipment or the components that go into it comes from China. The most advanced AI effort on Earth runs straight into a supply chain it doesn't control, and in a geopolitical climate where that dependency is becoming harder to ignore. You can have the money, you can have the chips, you can even outlast the protesters, and still you wait years for a box. Which brings us to the most famous example of all, Stargate, the flagship of the entire American build-out, announced at the White House. Its largest site sits in Abilene, Texas, and in March, the headlines screamed that it had been canceled. Here's the careful truth. OpenAI and Oracle didn't cancel Stargate. They capped one site's expansion, the plan to push that campus past about 1.2 gigawatts. After grid power delays ran more than a year long, the existing campus kept operating. Meta and Microsoft moved into capacity that OpenAI no longer planned to occupy. The broader 4.5 gigawatt partnership continued. So it wasn't a collapse. It was a redirect caused at its root by the same thing slowing everyone else. Not protesters, not a bubble, just power that wasn't ready in time. And that's where the three forces meet the biggest question of all. Is this a bubble? Step back from the noise, and the scale is genuinely hard to process. This year, the 4 biggest American tech companies are expected to spend more than $650 billion expanding AI capacity. Not collapsing, climbing, up roughly 50% in a single year. That is not the behavior of an industry losing confidence. That is the behavior of an industry that believes with total conviction that whoever builds the most wins. But some critics point to something underneath the numbers. They describe it as a form of circular financing. Watch the loop. NVIDIA invests in OpenAI. OpenAI commits hundreds of billions to data centers. Those data centers are filled with NVIDIA chips. NVIDIA holds a stake in the cloud firms renting that compute back out. Money moves in a circle, and from the outside, a circle can look exactly like growth, because when each company's spending becomes another company's revenue, demand can appear endless, right up until one link slows and the whole loop tightens. Is it as dangerous as the dot-com crash of 2000? Maybe not. Back then, the Nasdaq traded around 60 times earnings. Today, closer to 33. And unlike the fiber optic cable laid and abandoned in 1999, buried in the ground, useless, a monument to optimism, much of this infrastructure can be repurposed. The buildings stand. The land holds value. The power connections don't disappear. But the warning is real. If the revenue never catches up to the capital, the correction will not be gentle. And the revenue question is genuinely open. Right now, a lot of this compute is being rented by companies that are themselves not yet profitable, building products whose value propositions are still being tested in the market. That chain has to hold at every link. So here is where we actually stand in the summer of 2026. Not a crash, not a clean victory either. A sorting. The speculative projects, the ones announced with a press release and a website that says nothing but contact us, those are quietly dying. The serious ones, with locked-in power and real steel in the ground, are still rising. The reality is that the system appears to be deciding project by project which half deserves to exist. And the forces doing the deciding aren't the engineers anymore. They're a town in Missouri, a transformer factory with a 5-year backlog, a research firm with a satellite and a spreadsheet. None of them set out to shape the AI industry. Most of them have never been inside a data center. But here they are, pulling levers that a trillion-dollar sector cannot simply override. The question is no longer whether America can build the future. It's who gets to say no. And somewhere tonight, in a county you've never heard of, the next project is already on the agenda. The only question is, which one falls next?